Come all of you good workers, good news to you I'll tell, of how the good old Union has come in here to dwell.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
My daddy was a miner and I'm a miner's
But
son,
you know how my
and
mind
I'll
works.
stick with the
I see
Union.
like the kid in The Sixth Sense. I see links rather than dead people, and I can't help thinking that we shouldn't separate these two stories. That the tale of the DP World profits and the tale of the industrial action currently being undertaken by the RMT, with others set to follow, are actually inextricably linked. I think that there is an inextricable connection between the two that many people are desperate for you not to see. What should we do? How should we do it? I think from the top, actually. I cut the stories out of the newspaper in the morning. I've managed to lose them somehow on the journey from upstairs to downstairs. So I've got all the newspapers in front of me, but I haven't got all the stories. This is going to be fun, isn't it? So I currently have in front of me 8 completely blank sheets of paper. Off the top of my head then, DP World, the company that owns P&O, got rid of 800 workers without any notice whatsoever, without any warning at all. Everyone went nuts. And they've just posted profits of hundreds of millions of pounds. I've got the figure of 800 workers and 60 million pounds. They're probably in the bin. We should probably have done this off air. I've probably put them in the bin by accident. Let me just have another look. I'll see if I can find them. It's very professional, this, isn't it? No, absolutely nothing. So we'll do it all. We'll do it all cold. Seriously, we'll be fine. So about 600 million profits, 800 people sacked or thereabouts. The RMT are on strike today, which messes up. Or the London Underground is shut today. Train strikes, railways were shut yesterday. Tomorrow is set also to be problematic. And I can't help thinking that we need to see these things as being of a piece. We need to see these things as being the same story. And when you are told by Liz Truss and others that we need to reduce regulations, we need to, get rid of red tape and free up business to do more, they're not really talking about the takeaway on the corner of your street that's likely to go bust when the new energy bills start kicking in. They are talking about companies like DP World. 800 workers gone with no notice, £600 million worth of profits. So I think we'll start there. And we'll start with this question. When members of government were queuing up to attack this and insisting that things were going to change and that things were going to... this was intolerable and this was evidence that something had to be done and onwards and onwards and onwards. And now, 6 months or so later, we're looking at Liz Truss on one front page today promising to make it harder to go on strike, promising to make it harder for... unions to take industrial action. Here you go. It's only the Daily Express, so, take it with a pinch of salt. Liz Truss plans to crack down on militant unions who hold the country to ransom. I suppose the first question you can answer, if you're feeling chipper, is why these two stories... Where was it all? Where were all the stories? Which upstairs? Well, we found them all now. Everyone relax. I've got my stories. Everything's going to be okay. I was doing all right, actually. Could have carried on like that. Thank you very much indeed. P&O Ferries owners are gangsters for making record profits after sackings, is the headline in The Guardian. And the headline in The Express is Truss promises new laws to smash strike misery. The first thing you can do this morning, if you fancy it, is give me a call and tell me why these two stories should not be knitted together by any stretch of the imagination in any way, shape or form. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need to do that. Because... I think it's emblematic of almost everything that's happening in this country. When you factor in the third leg of the stool, when you throw in the continuing clamour among the Conservative leadership candidates to cut regulations, whatever it is that they mean by that, to make it easier for businesses to do more of what they are currently doing, I can't help thinking that this is the absolute and inevitable consequence of it. Boris Johnson promised to take action in the courts against the company. In the courts. A week later, they backtracked on that. The government said it would instead rely on the Insolvency Service investigation. We're still Waiting for that, of course, the TUC has written to the Insolvency Service saying that its directors should be disqualified. The same directors have just trousered profits, not personally, of course, but the business has just posted profits, as I said, of £600 million. So when people like Boris Johnson and Grant Shapps queued up to condemn this behaviour by DP World, do you think they were lying? Or do you think they simply didn't understand what they were talking about? Because it seems to me that the direction of political traffic from the Conservatives is towards making it easier for companies to behave like DP World did. Liz Truss is planning to crack down on militant unions who hold the country to ransom. That's in Daily Express Ease. What it means is it will be even harder to call strikes. What else could those DP World employees have done if they'd got wind of what was planned? The fact that it appears, and we await the results of the Insolvency Service investigation, but we appear to be looking at a scenario in which the next government is going to make it even harder for workers to protect themselves, going to make the bar even higher for ordinary workers to take industrial action. What I think we'll do this morning is have a simple look at the history of how this has happened. So there are your specific examples. There are three things going on. There is the DP World profits, there is the industrial action on the railways and the London Underground, and there is the pledge from Liz Truss to make it even harder for unions to go on strike. And that speaks to me of two countries, two populations. And for, I think in recent years, the first portion of the population have been in the majority. People who think they hate unions. People who think that industrial action is designed to further enrich lazy, already far too highly paid railway workers. And then the other half of the population looks at what happened to the P&O workers and looks at the profits that are being posted by the owning company and simply thinks, we've lost almost all the rights we have. We've lost almost every recourse that we have. If companies can do this, get condemned by government, and then everybody goes quiet and it moves along, the question of how this has been permitted to happen is answered, I think, by pointing out the negativity that has been encouraged towards trades unions among the population. So that's what I want to do, okay? It's 11 minutes after 10, a slightly odd start to the programme, given that I had absolutely no material to work with, despite having selected quite detailed stories from which to leap into our daily exchanges. You might be a little bit older than me. Yeah, Brendan points out already, why are these unions militant? Militant in Liz Truss's world is simply a synonym for effective. If a union is actually effective, if a union actually has leverage, actually has power, then it's militant. There's nothing militant in particular about the RMT. They are simply one of the few areas of the trade union movement left that can exercise real power on behalf of its members, and the members are ordinary workers. So you might be a bit older than me. We had a look at this last time there was a strike. It was interesting, but we want a little bit more information. Why has this country become a place where so many workers have been successfully persuaded that workers' rights are a bad thing and that worker representation via the trade union movement is a negative? I really, really want you to talk about yourself, if you can. And I don't know that it would be helpful for me to argue with you today, because you are going to tell me about the journey that you've been on. And I can't tell you that you haven't been on that journey. We might pick a few points in it where possibly you went through the wrong door or you took the wrong turning. But theoretically, and I'm quite naive about stuff like this, theoretically, everybody should be in favour of trade unions and everybody should be in one. They are, the reason why we don't have children working in factories anymore. They are the reason why we don't have people routinely losing limbs while working on production lines. They are the reason why we have minimum wage legislation, the reason why we have health and safety protections at work, the reason why we have paid holidays. And a lot of those things are in retreat. A lot of those things are in abeyance. A lot of these hard-won victories have actually proven not to be permanent. I always think of abortion law in America at this point, which was the biggest wake-up call of the year for me, for the very simple reason that things you thought had been permanently progress that you thought had been permanently made, is only ever temporary. Dark forces will always be pushing back against the light, always pushing back against good forces. And those dark forces, I'm really sorry, they do break down in really simple terms. It's the politics of mill owners and master sweeps, people who see people exclusively as a commodity. I'm only interested in you insofar as how much money you can make for me. Everywhere you look now, energy companies, water companies, everywhere. It's care homes we're going to talk about a little later in the programme. It's all about treating people like udders and seeing how much cash you can squeeze from them without any recognition of their humanity or their own dignity. That's what they talk about. That's what they mean when they talk about getting rid of regulations, when they talk about getting rid of rights and red tape. They mean getting rid of dignity, getting rid of protection, getting rid of legislation designed to recognise the basic fundamental humanity of a workforce. How has it happened? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973. Remember, you've got a Prime Minister who thinks you're lazy. That's probably part of the answer. Or rather, you're about to have a Prime Minister who thinks you're lazy. Caught on tape, essentially calling you lazy, not having enough graft. It's all about the work ethic. That's what they honestly believe. Because that was recorded without her knowing. So it's what they honestly believe. What she says in public, very different. She said in public the media were to blame for Boris Johnson being finally held to account by his own party for his own actions. Somehow that was the media's fault, Liz Truss has claimed already. But how have they done it? And crucially, I'm a little bit frightened of asking this question, how do we undo it? Mick Lynch might have some answers to that if he ever gets here. He's not actually due until 10:45. I'm being a bit funny. Funny peculiar, probably more than funny ha-ha. What is it? I'll tell you what part of it is. That part of it is that word militant, as a few of you have pointed out. Isn't it mad what they do with words? You use the word militant when you're talking about a trade unionist or an environmentalist, militant, and it makes you frightened. It's designed to make you frightened. They talk about red tape when what they really mean is workers' rights. So you think red tape is bad. Red tape is bad. It's incredible what they do. I think if I had my time again, I'd probably study semantics. Just to see the power of weaponizing certain words. Like woke would be a good example recently. A word that essentially means alive to injustice, alive to prejudice, aware of inequalities and unfairness has been turned into a weapon by a bunch of weapons, ironically enough. But on this one, militant, I think that's part of the key to the question that I'm asking you. 0345 6060 973. Paul Jarvis says, you haven't read out any text messages from people who've got their head stuck up a camel's backside yet. Please do so, James. It's what I tune in for. Paul, I can only work with what I've got. I shall have a little look in the old inbox to see if there are any contributions from Idiot Corner. The problem is, the more fuss we make about it, the more worried I become that people actually submit ludicrous messages deliberately that they don't really mean in the hope of having them read out in Idiot's Corner. It's not much of a badge of honour, is it? But I suppose you might be bored. 17 minutes after 10. My apologies for the slightly ramshackle introduction to the programme this morning. It's good to know that I can do it, you know, if there's a sort of power cut or something like that in the studio and somehow the microphone works and nothing else does. I sit here in the darkness. I reckon I could probably pull it off. But there we are. Those are the issues. The company that fired 800 workers without any notice at all, prompting condemnation from everywhere, from Boris Johnson down. Grant Shapps particularly apoplectic about it. They've all gone absolutely silent as it's announced that company has made £600 million. Funny that, isn't it? And at the same time, trade union action, industrial action on the railways, enjoying a little bit more support than I can remember in my lifetime, but in a country where, for the last 40 years, industrial action has been seen as the enemy. I want to know why. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. And because we want some happy thoughts, it can be undone, can't it? A real sense at the moment that some of these things can be undone. Are you optimistic? I genuinely think this is the most important question, or one of the most important questions we ever ask. And I've asked it before. I've never absolutely pinned it down. I've never completely nailed it. Partly because I understand, I mean, some days you wake up, you try to get to work, it's almost impossible. You're absolutely blooming furious with the people who are on strike. The idea of doctors going on strike terrifies us, or firefighters taking industrial action. It's frightening. And of course, there's plenty of people in my profession who are really feeding that fear and stoking those flames of division. But in the course of my lifetime, as a 50-year-old man, in the course of my lifetime, if you think of the politically conscious period of my life, it would almost begin with the miners' strike, and it ends today. And it doesn't end today, but it comes up to hopefully I'll still be here tomorrow. And it's astonishing that the workforce of Britain have been so successfully turned against organisations, the only organisations ever to exist dedicated to protecting the workforce of Britain. Just riddle me that, will you? Why has this country become a place where workers generally hate workers' rights? 0345 6060 Jim's in Glasgow. Jim, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. I worked for one of the big four supermarkets. I retired earlier this year. Now, approximately 2.5 years ago, they changed our conditions, contracts.
Yep.
Called it a contract 6, let's say. And they gave us, I think it was 6 months. November that year, it was November the 6th that year. That was when the date you had to sign the contract. It didn't make any difference whether you were in there 5, 10, 15, 20 years. If you hadn't signed the contract by that day, you were out the door. No compensation, nothing. I lost public holidays. That we used to get paid public holidays. I could take 2, sit in the house and get paid.
Is this a form of fire and rehire?
It's a fire and rehire. They've done the same with the gas workers.
Yes, they have.
And this was over 2 years ago, so this has been in the pipeline for a long time. And you had no recourse, you had no say. Even with a union, it was all above board. And this is what's happening now. And another wee thing, you say Boris was the clown. Boris was a wee bit. You're looking at Liz Truss now, and all I can see is Chucky the doll.
That's a little unfair. I mean, no. No, it is. It's a bit. I think it might be a tiny bit misogynistic, actually, Jim. But I'm sure you didn't mean it like that. I don't think we need to make fun of her appearance, given that her pronouncements and her policies are so.
No, I don't mean it that way. I mean she's sitting in a corner there, and she's you don't know what's going to happen next.
No, you don't. Answer my big question. How has, in the course of your lifetime, how has the British workforce been turned into a phenomenon that resents organisations dedicated to protecting the British workforce?
Too many Tories in power.
No, I need a bit more than that from you.
Too many years under the Tories. I'm sorry.
But what has happened? What are the actual processes?
I don't know. We've been bent over and we've taken it. It's time we stopped.
I'm stopping you there before we get any more graphic in our analogies and descriptions. Thank you, Jim. He's right. It's such a funny thing that the practice of actually stripping away the rights you've already got has now become almost commonplace. Think about, this is something we'll probably talk to Mick Lynch about, actually, because it makes it a bit more complicated, this question of supporting strikes. I walked past the Pret a Manger this morning on the way up. I came into Waterloo Station in the end. I finally fought my way to the coalface. And Pret was shut. Pret's are never shut at that time of day. And obviously it was shut because the staff couldn't get in yet. I imagine it opens a little later when the overground railways in London start working again. But the one I walked past was shut. And that means, and I don't know that Pret a Manger do this, but some businesses that haven't been able to open, their staff will be on 0-hour contracts, which means that those staff won't get paid today, which actually will make them cross with the unions. Do you see? I think that's part of it, isn't it? You've got to tug these threads and see what actually begins to fall apart. So you're, say, a minimum wage sandwich worker in a sandwich bar in London, and you're on minimum wage, and you're on a 0-hour contract, right? You only get paid for the hours you do. Today you can't work because the boss isn't opening the shop because he can't get into work. So you don't get paid. And that there is part of the answer to the question of how can workers be turned against workers' rights. The trick is to turn workers against workers. John's in Bromsgrove. John, what would you like to say?
Yeah, James, I've read recently somewhere that 44% of union members
Oh, you got
for the Conservative Party.
that vote for the Conservatives. You've got to do better than that. I can't, because I'm the one that just plucks figures out of the ether and then hopes to
Okay,
imbue
well,
them.
maybe someone can back that.
Well,
back that
you
figure
should.
up.
Can you try and do that before you come on air? I mean, honestly, could you imagine if I turned up at work without having any of my stories in front of me or any of the carefully curated newspaper articles that I'm going to use to prompt my car? Could you imagine the trouble I'd get into if I was that amateurish? You can't just ring in and start dropping numbers all over the place without sources and provenance.
Well, maybe I've been too influenced by Grant Shapps and the other guys like that. Maybe I don't
Winging
know.
it, winging it. Go on, let's take it as a given then.
From my own experience,
Yes.
you know, you see it, don't you? That people, the members of the same union that you are,
Yes.
have got very different political views. There's a broad spectrum, and I think that's my point. Really, is that there isn't a very strong connection between union membership and political affiliation or thought.
No, probably not. I mean, certainly with if you know, some workforces union membership is a requirement, isn't it? So they're just paying their subs essentially because they have to, almost, rather than with any particular commitment to the
people see
cause.
the benefits in their own workplace. I think they see the collective bargaining and they see the way that the union can sort of help them in their own workplace.
But they don't see it as part of the left-wing movement.
Yeah, and they don't. And when they're looking to cast their vote in an election, they don't make the connection between what political parties are doing in terms of being pro or anti-union. They just don't see that connection. It's something that happens in the workplace. That's, you know, their union membership, and then when they're in the ballot booth, they don't think about that. They look at it.
And that's part of the success we're describing, isn't it? The persuading people not to be supportive of the broader movement somehow by atomising their own experience.
Yeah, and that's where unions have to go out and engage and actually tell people what the connection is.
How do they? Because, you know, the stranglehold upon most media platforms that's exercised by the right wing is
But those
immense.
media platforms will still take an advert. You know, you can put an advert in all of those newspapers that would be supporting the anti-union political view, and you can set out your case. You know, you can put a TV advert on, and people will see
I remember,
that.
I think it was an ad for Unison. I forget, but it's a long time ago, so it's not evidence that the advert didn't work. For a long time, I would remember exactly who it was, and it was. I think it was like insects moving something, and the idea that you could do nothing on your own, but if there was loads of you trying to do it, then anything was possible. That was actually a hugely effective piece of pro-union advertising that I can still remember now, and I think that was probably 30 years ago or 25 years ago. Someone will know what I'm talking about and send me a picture of it. Thank you, John. Just down the road from Kidderminster there in Bromsgrove, lovely part of the world. In fact, Chaddesley Corbett, a village that sits just between Kidderminster and Bromsgrove, I really would recommend you visit. It's an amazing place there called Harvington Hall. Have you ever been to Harvington Hall, John?
Yeah, I took the kids there. They actually studied Harvington Hall at school, so we had to go.
What do you mean you had to go? What do you mean you had to go? It was a pleasure to go. It was a privilege. Did you go in the priest hole?
I was surprised. I wasn't expecting it to be, and it really was. And it's a lovely setting that it's in as well.
It's incredible.
So,
it's
incredible.
incredible.
I recommend it,
It's got some of the best priest holes examples in the country, where they used to hide the Catholics during Elizabeth I's reign. And if you went to my school, you'd know where they all are. And sometimes there are ones that aren't even mentioned on the official tour. I've been in a couple of those priest holes. It's slightly off topic, that. We'll get back to trade unions, politics, and this fundamental question of okay, let's do it even in a more simple term. What put you off? You personally, right there. What was it? You look back and you think, yeah, James is right, I don't like unions. Why not? Because theoretically you should, but I sound a bit undergraduate when I say that. It's the only institutions dedicated to protecting workers' rights in the country. Why would any worker be against it? Oh, just get over yourself, O'Brien. You weren't around in 1970. What was it? Just a simple thing. Maybe it's a person. Just right. Look me in the eye and tell me. I'll tell you what put me off unions, James. ... How has a workforce been turned against trade unions? 03456060973. But more simply, more easily, perhaps. How have you? What broke you? Well, when you look back now and think, oh, I'm on the other side of the argument from James on this one. I'm not always. I'm not completely stupid. But I'll tell you what he doesn't know. He doesn't understand ... What is it? How does it happen? Because I'll tell you what, if you don't think there's a link between P&O Ferries owners posting incredible profits shortly after sacking 800 workers without notice, to condemnation from everyone from Boris Johnson downwards, who subsequently, of course, went silent, and the role of trade unions, then I've got a bridge to sell you. Tina is in Gainsborough. Tina, what would you like to say?
Hello.
Tina.
I'd just like to say, James, first time I've listened to you today.
Really?
But, yeah, my husband listens to you all the time, though.
Bless him.
But I just think it's bad that if you're working for an employee and they're not very kind to you,
Yes.
and they tell you, right, that's it, your holiday, you can't have this, and you can't. There's no one we can go to, so you just have to either take it or move on. And I think it's just really, really sad, especially if you're in a job that you like,
Yes.
and they take advantage of you. There's no one you can actually go to or talk to, like higher up than them.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
No, it doesn't just make sense. It is an absolutely perfect description of a world without trade unions.
Exactly, yeah. And
Now-
then you need money now as well, quite a lot of money for unions, so you can't always afford it, can you?
That's a chicken and egg. What comes first? The attack upon workers' rights that means they haven't got enough money to pay for unions, or the lack of support for the unions? How does it work with you? One of the strangest things that ever happened to me in a television studio, Tina, was when somebody looked me in the eye. We're talking about, I can't remember what it was. I can't remember which industrial action it was. And they said, well, I don't have... Obviously, we were talking about pensions. We weren't even talking about industrial action. It was... Someone said, well, I don't have a pension. My pension rights got taken away. My company shut down our pension scheme. Why should these people have pensions? So, because you don't have any protection in the workplace, does that tempt you to disapprove of the people that do? So when the railway workers go on strike, is there any envy there? Is there any sense of, well, they shouldn't be doing that because I couldn't do that if I was unhappy with my boss, which I sense you probably are sometimes?
Well, yeah, that is so true. Like, it's. I think it's wrong. I think you should treat your employees with respect. But a lot of employees now are quite crafty because they don't even give you a contract, do they? It's all no contract, and I just think it's wrong.
What sector are you in? What sector are you in, Tina?
Caring.
Oh, gosh. I think you're among some of the most poorly treated members of the workforce in almost everywhere. The first time someone told me that you don't get paid when you're travelling between jobs, I couldn't actually believe my ears.
Yeah, it's so true that they can. Don't be wrong. I enjoy my caring. I
can
love
tell
to
you
work.
do. I know you do.
It's just the money side of it, and the fact that they can say to you, right, you're not entitled to your 28 days. You're only entitled to 19 now, or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's just so wrong because caring is hard. It's not easy.
I know.
I just wish that these bosses would just do it for one day and just see how hard you actually do work.
I think you've made, many more brilliant points than I've managed to make so far this morning, because you're speaking entirely from lived experience, and that simple frustration of feeling put upon, feeling exploited, feeling underappreciated, even though you've got an almost vocational dedication to the work that you do. And those words, when you said there's no one you can turn to, there's no one you can call upon to help you or to protect you. And yet this is a country in which the only organisations dedicated to doing what you want, what you need, what you don't currently have, the trade unions, have been demonised for decades successfully. And I'm going to continue trying to unpick how it's worked, why it's worked so successfully. Thank you, Tina. We may be talking about social care in the next hour, so do stay tuned for that. And welcome aboard. Love to your husband for I should put him on commission. I give him a finder's fee. Every new listener counts. Maria's in Earlsfield. Marie, what would you like to say?
Good morning.
Hello.
Right. The reason is why it all started, or it's gone downhill, was that recession in, I can't remember, late 80s, whatever. And it was fear because the supply and demand of workers and the amount of people that told me, oh, we're lucky to have a job. And I go, no, you're not lucky. Yeah. They're lucky to have you. Yeah. Plus, what happened then was the workers, which really, really made me angry, turned on each other. And yes, the media, the politicians have made them fear, like we've got to have jobs, because everyone was desperate, like they are now. And the reason the reason people are all standing up and going, oh my God, would it be good to have a union? Of course it would. When people turn against unions, I look at them and think, are you telling me you want to be treated? I've got daughters, one who's doing two people's jobs, and every week there's more demand, and like everybody else, she needs the job because she has to pay her mortgage.
Of course.
And the employers just keep cutting and cutting and cutting, and they're all getting fatter and richer and greedier. And do you know what? I honestly believe that it should be all out, or everybody.
A general
everybody,
strike.
And a general strike. This is what this country needs, to let them know you have pushed us to the limit and we're not going to put up with it anymore. I'm self-employed because I couldn't work for them. If an employer turned around and said to me, you've got to do double the amount of work for less money, I'd go, well, it wouldn't happen because I just couldn't work for anybody. I work, I earn, I charge what I know I'm worth, and you know what? I get paid. And when I want a holiday, I take a holiday. I'm not dictated like all these workers are. Oh, no, you can't have this, you can't have that, you can't. Do you know what? All out. And that will change this ethic that they've just got fatter and greedier and treating. And without us, they are nothing. Of all the shops closed, all the people that are earning all this money in the profit, what are they all going to come in and do what the poor people...
Do you know, that Tina's touched a nerve there. You are as well. But already people are saying she's hit the nail on the head. Bosses have no idea what we do anymore.
No. Do you know what? It's all done by them algorithms. My daughter, literally, she can't believe it. She's been a manager for years in big department stores. She understands that it's all profit-based, but they get these stupid algorithms going and goes, oh, they just don't realise.
That's funny, isn't it? Because at the top of the show, and I was bumbling around a bit, Marie, because I lost all my notes, but I kept coming back to the words humanity and dignity, and that's what we're talking about, isn't it?
Yes, well, all out. Everybody.
Oh, blimey.
Everybody.
Well, I'll see what Mick Lynch has got to say about that when he goes.
Well, I'm behind him and Crow. I love that man. And who would want a union that literally have got brilliant work and holidays? Who would want that?
Well, that's what I'm asking. That's what I'm trying to do. That's what I'm trying to find out. Can I tell you a secret?
Go on and go.
This phone line is not great. Normally, I would have cut you off and moved on to someone else, but I was frightened of you, Marie, so I left you on.
Well, a lot of people are.
I'm not flipping surprised.
I think in my last life I was a union.
I was about to say we need shop stewards like you speaking up for us. Thank you, Marie, and apologies to anyone who was struggling to make that out because of the call. But I think Marie plus Tina equals something quite special there, doesn't it? Andy's in Morden. Andy, what would you like to say?
Yeah, good morning, James. I'm of the opinion that a lot of the workforce have forgotten about the struggles that there were just to get tiny incremental rises in your pay, tiny incremental allowances for the gear that you wore, and it's just melted into the background. And people have just forgotten exactly what the it wasn't so much the fights. I mean, when I first started work, I worked in a unionised establishment. It was a closed shop, but it wasn't militant. It was.
What does that mean? Let's stop. I'm going to stop you there. What does militant? Yeah. Militant is like the kind of carry on at your convenience film when Sid James was the shop steward, and if someone used the wrong screwdriver, then he'd take the entire workforce out at the drop of a hat. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, that's
because that's dead now. That doesn't exist anymore. Liz Truss is using the word militant as a synonym for effective.
Absolutely. If the pies were not enough in the canteen, it'd be all right, all that, boys.
Hang on a minute. Hot pies, mate. I was talking about trivial stuff. I had a pie last night. Go on.
And I'm pretty sure that's why the Labour Party are not allowing any of their ministers or MPs to go on the picket line, because as soon as they do, that big bad wolf of the 1970s will start being flagged up all over again. When now the circle, we've gone too far round in the opposite direction, away from unions, to be comfortable. I
think you're right, and it's actually quite refreshing to hear you seeing it so clearly, in that Starmer has to think about much, much more than just that simple instance of industrial action. He has to think, and he's on a hiding to nothing, in my opinion, and I could make quite a strong case for saying stuff them and show support for the unions, but his calculation is that it would do more harm than good electorally, and his top priority, of course, is getting elected, is becoming Prime Minister.
do that, they'll end up with pictures of Red Robbo on the front page of
course they will.
the Daily
But it's
Express.
already started. You know, the militant unions. Liz Truss plans to crack down on militant unions who hold the country to ransom. Now, you don't know and I don't know how many people are still swallowing this, but probably quite a lot. And they will also swallow the depiction of Labour MPs, Labour ministers on the picket lines, as you say, as being the heirs to Arthur Scargill or the heirs to Red Robbo. Thank you, Andy. He's coming up to 10:45. That's the trick, you know. This is why sometimes I think we're all too short-term, because the really bad guys are long-term. I mean, the real protectors of the status quo. I used to think, I still do, to be honest, find this story very charming. I've told it a million times. You can probably sing along with it. But when the last Duke of Westminster was asked for advice on being rich, he said to someone, my advice to you, old boy, is to have an ancestor who was best friends with William the Conqueror. So, you know, the absolute string pullers, the very pinnacle of the pyramid, are protecting fortunes that are 1,000 years old, more than 1,000 years old. Landowners and visit areas of the country, whether you're talking about the middle of Westminster or whether you're talking about the coast of North Norfolk, it's all owned by one person. One person. It's not the same person, incidentally, but you know, these people right at the very top. And we tend to think in electoral cycles or news cycles. They think in generations. Their job is simply to hand on to their heir more than they inherited from their father or their grandfather. And we don't think like that. So you're looking at how can we chisel away at workers' rights? How can we reduce it? Well, we start slow and we start small, because we've given away a lot of ground in the course of the 20th century. That post-war settlement was not good for us. You know, the days of Downton Abbey are behind us. Well, that post-war settlement was a surrender for the owning classes. How can we start pushing back? Well, you best bet is to turn worker against worker, as we've already discussed, but also, as Andy has beautifully identified, to pin down that very simple question of progress. And have a new workforce coming through that is almost ridiculing the triumphs of the old world. Oh, look at old Terry over there protecting his tea break. He's so obsessed with his holiday. Do you see? There's small victories, incremental victories. And it was Unison, that advert I mentioned, which, as I predicted, someone has dug up for me. Andy has dug it up for me, and I've just retweeted it. A freelance member of the NUJ, appropriately enough, Andy Von Pip, and it was, you've probably seen it, there's an ant with a leaf. I said it was insects, and there's a bear stuck in the middle of the road, and the ant with the leaf turns up, and he's all on his own, and he's got no chance whatsoever of getting past the big bear. And I'll tell you the rest of that story after this. Given the interest in this conversation and my enduring fascination with it, it changed slightly the running order of the running order. Like I could get away with pretending there's a running order. I turned up without any stories at 10 o'clock this morning, honestly. But I have a vague idea of where the conversation is going to go in the course of the programme, and I have usually a few stories in front of me that might prompt conversations. But I'm going to change the next hour, and because we just spoke to Mick Lynch, he's very nearby now, and I just thought, I wonder if you'd take your calls for an hour, talking about the trade union movement, struggling to come to a full understanding of what's happened over the years. Quite a lot of admiration for him coming in, but some criticism as well, particularly on the Brexit front. That's something you might want to ring in and ask him about. So he's up for it. So Mick Lynch will be taking your calls, the General Secretary of the RMT, taking your calls live on LBC for the entire next hour of the programme from 11 o'clock. Spread the word. Let your mates know. Turn us on in the office or the factory or the workplace or the building site. I'm getting a lot of love from building sites at the moment. I can't think why. 03456. Well, I'll give you the number when he's here, because I've got plenty to get through already. Levy is in Edgware. Levy, what would you like to say?
Oh, hey there, James. Lovely to talk to you. By the way, it's Levy. Hungarian name. Yeah,
Levy.
Many people.
My apologies.
No worries. I get that every day. So what I wanted to talk to you about is that I basically see like a deliberate push from stakeholders, and by that I mean owners of companies, bigger companies, upper management of companies, and even politicians, to try to pursue people basically to act against their own self-interest. And in that I mean, to go against unions. And I don't think it's hard to see how it can work, even in a country like in the UK. I mean, as you put it yesterday, UK being like the only country in world history that ever imposed like sanctions on itself. So you know,
if they can do that, they can do anything.
Yeah, if they can do that, they can do anything. If you just say a lie enough times with enough conviction in your voice, people start believing you, right? And there's also a personal side of this equation. You already spoke about this one, but my brother and my sister-in-law, they both work in McDonald's.
Okay.
They are both on 0-hour contracts.
Right. Yes.
They can't work today and they can't work tomorrow. Now you are already living on a minimum wage. Prices are going up everywhere. I work in the energy sector right now, so I know this trouble is just going to be bigger. In terms of the,
so your brother and his wife, then that's 2 days no pay.
That's 2 days no pay, and like literally when something comes to like this, 2 days no pay can mean that you might not make the rent this month, right?
Yeah, well, I think this is the first question for Mick Lynch, actually, isn't it? Because I mean, I know he'll have an answer and he'll have dealt with similar inquiries in the past, but that's the ripple effect of industrial action. 2 McDonald's workers, 2 days, no pay.
Yes, but, in my opinion, it's just that the whole system stinks, right?
I think that more and more people are coming to that conclusion, but not enough. And
not enough at the moment.
One wonders what will happen, particularly the next Prime Minister who's been elected by a constituency made up largely of pensioners, people who are living off their savings or living off their pensions.
And like I see that in my brother and my sister-in-law. Like on one hand, they are glad that they don't have to go into work today because it can be hard and demanding, and they often also complain that people treat them like trash because they work in a McDonald's.
And it's I hear you. I mean, you covered a lot of ground there, Levy. I shall not only speak to you again, I hope, but I will remember how to pronounce your name for next time as well. My apologies for that. 10:53 is the time. Just in case you think there's a hyperbole or exaggeration involved, it's a little story today. You remember we water been in the news a bit this week. You remember water? I allowed myself to use the word punami yesterday, but only on a carefully rationed number of occasions. And the millions of litres of water being lost through leaks, and the amount of sewage being pumped into our seas, and the failure to invest and build new infrastructure while they were taking billions of pounds in profit post-privatisation out of the sector. And then today the news emerges that pay for the bosses of Britain's water companies increased by more than 20% last year. Grant Shapps trying to introduce or threatening to introduce legislation that would force union members to accept pay offers that are lower than inflation, and doing absolutely nothing to curtail the activities of water company bosses presiding over epic failure for everyone except their own dividend-munching shareholders, and getting pay rises themselves in excess of 20%. They've looked at 22 water companies operating across the country. Executives were paid a combined total of £24.8 million. The Liberal Democrats have done this analysis. We don't talk about the Liberal Democrats enough on this programme, and I need to rectify that. But as I mentioned to Paul earlier, when he was complaining that there weren't any text contributions from Idiot's Corner yet on this programme, I can only work with what you give me. I can only work with what we've got. But we should pay more attention to the Liberal Democrats for reasons of democracy, I suppose. They've done the research. They've seen an average rise in executive pay of nearly £200,000, with the average bonus alone rising by £100,000. Liv Garfield of Severn Trent Water, which is my home company, if you like, much of the Midlands and Mid Wales, highest paid executive in the period, receiving a total pay packet of £3.9 million. £3.9 million. For running a water company. I could just about make a case for someone being worth that sort of money if the water company was knocking it out of the park. But they're not. They're pumping shocking amounts of sewage into the sea. do sail a bit close to the wind with that little word play there, and I worry. Mikey's in the chair today. You keep your finger appropriately enough, mate. It's the dump button that you need to be keeping your eye on. Aria is in Hackney. Aria, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. In relation to the conversation that you're having today, I think one of the main reasons why people are either like unaware in terms of what a union does, and there's a lack of education in certain respects, but then there's also an element of fear. How old are you? I am 35.
Okay, you sounded younger. I mean that as a compliment. Is that in your generation? Is it just ignorance, just a genuine lack of knowledge or appreciation of what a union could do? What could a union do for you? Is the question?
In terms of like on my part, as someone who's I'm a first generation migrant.
Yes.
And one of the things that I learned about whether is when doing the British citizenship test was like about the union history, and also in terms of like how legislation works and within Parliament and so on. And in terms of as a migrant, I know those I know that history.
Can you give me a bit of information on? So we should probably keep this quiet. The Daily Mail will have an absolute fit if it finds out that new citizens have been taught about the trade union movement.
No, in general, it's a general test where it's
yes, I know. But what? Yeah. So in the citizenship test, you actually get schooled on. You're required to understand.
In terms of like the industrial revolution, like it does cover a small part of it. Okay. I did it in 2007.
Absolutely fascinating.
When I did it.
Yeah.
That's when I did it. Like I don't know what it looks like now.
Sure.
But I've been a union rep, and where I used to work, a lot of the things that we faced is that when we were sharing information as to why we were striking, or we were striking for the living wage.
Yes.
There's a phrase. And there's a thing which is on one element you have a lot of the workers were migrants, so they're people that don't want to shake the boat, so to speak, because their job security is based on having an income to be able to fend for themselves.
That's a huge part of the trick, isn't it? You've got to, and in fact, our earlier caller touched on this. I think it was Marie, wasn't it? The idea that if you can make people really frightened of not having a job, then you can treat them even worse than you are already.
Yeah, and as citizens, like what we don't realize is that like companies that have a lot of power. Like there was a time where unions could do a walkout. You can't do that. You have to go through a process of having a certain percentage.
Yeah, they've made it harder, and today they're promising to make it even harder, to make it harder still.
Exactly, and that is through legislation that have come to in form of legislation that have taken those rights away and those powers away, and I think that is also like on a political level is aligned to what the parties do in relation to
here we are. I've got to crack on, mate, because I'm late for the news now. But I mean, here we are sitting in a country where there are these two, like a Scylla and Charybdis, like clashing together. Trade unions finally finding a little bit of muscle, and a Conservative Party leadership candidate, or battle rather, which is already throwing up promises to make it even harder for trade unions to take industrial action, and a population that doesn't know which way to turn. Well, maybe they're right. Maybe it shouldn't be so easy to strike. Maybe it is too easy to go on strike. They're certainly having a strike. They're on strike. Madness. But there we are. And that is, I would say, 40 years of very, very deliberate grooming. Mick Lynch is with me, General Secretary of the RMT, all over the news, understandably, given that there is the aftermath of yesterday's industrial action on the railways and another day of action for tomorrow. The London Underground is also largely closed today. And the headlines are pretty clear. Workers ready for months of strikes. Railway workers can afford to go on strike for months in a synchronised action. One of their union leaders has said as the summer of strikes continues to disrupt commuters. Mick Lynch, General Secretary of the RMT, said workers were completely committed to industrial action as they staged another day of strikes over pay, jobs and working conditions. Mick has very kindly agreed, and very at short notice actually, agreed to take your calls for an hour. So if you want to book your place on the switchboard, do so now, 0345 6060 973. And having toured the studios of the country for much of the last few months, I wouldn't want you to hold back. I'm confident he'll be quite happy to deal with any questions that you've got. So call in now, 0345 6060 973. I'll start, Mick. Thank you for this. Thank you for doing this. I just spoke to a lad whose brother works in McDonald's and his sister-in-law works in McDonald's as well. They're on 0 hours contract. They've got 2 days now where they can't get to work, which means they don't get paid. So just for kick-off, for starters, just speak directly to them, if you would.
Well, I'm sorry for that. And 0 hours contracts are a national disgrace. What needs to happen with those contracts is they need to be made illegal so that when people have problems such as this, and let's not forget, if they were sick with COVID or with a genuine complaint, they wouldn't get paid either. So this is the modern mode of British business and British capitalism, if you want to use that word, outsourcing, 0 hours contracts, casual work, precarious work, whatever you want to call it. And that's exactly what we're fighting in these disputes. They want to drive railway workers and other key workers onto those type of precarious contracts where you're at the beck and call of the employer and there's no balance in the workplace between what they can demand off you and what you can expect back for your labour. So the problem there is not, obviously it's an immediate problem of the railway disputes, but the long-term problem is the precarious state of British employment and what has happened to the workplace in the last 40 years. Since the power of the unions was diminished under the Thatcher era. And previously, we used to be able to organise hospitality. Unions was very strong in hospitality areas. And they've been wiped out, if we're frank. So people are at beck and call of very ruthless, profitable companies. And you won't find many corporations more profitable than McDonald's. But they outsource their restaurants, of course. Most McDonald's in this country are not owned or have any connection with McDonald's. They're for a franchise system that then use 0 hours and casual work. But that's a disgrace.
Let's say everything you're saying is true. I believe it is. It's no comfort to these two people, is it? This is in a way the pincer movement, in that they're going to be looking at the protection your members enjoy while paying the price for that protection being exercised literally in their own pockets.
Indeed, and I accept that, and I do understand it. But the dilemma we would have then is that everybody else in the economy goes down to the level that these two people are, and that is what we call the race to the bottom. That's exactly where corporate Britain wants to take us. And if you go to the NHS, for instance, you will find that everybody cleaning or serving the food or doing the porterage is living on virtually the same sorts of contracts, where they're working for global multinationals, but with no conditions, no pension, purely the hourly rate, which is often at the statutory minimum. That's where they want to put a lot of other people in this society, and that's what's wrong with the world of work at the moment.
You mentioned 40 years. That was actually the subject of the first hour of the programme, looking at how the country has become a place where organisations dedicated to workers' rights have been so successfully demonised in the eyes of many workers. Can you give us a potted history of that, of just for people who perhaps aren't paying as much attention as you have done over the years to the relationship between management and workers? How has the United Kingdom become a place where someone like Liz Truss can think that promising on the front page of the Express to make it harder for workers to go on strike? I think she's talking about you when she plans to crack down on militant unions who hold the country to ransom, and that not only sells papers but also gets politicians elected.
Well, you'd imagine that unions just sit around saying, how can we be militant today? What unions do is respond to what their members need and want. And what most people at this moment need is a pay rise. And they also want decent conditions. And where you've got them, they want to hang on to them. So in the early 80s, it would be normal that most people in this country were directly employed by the organisation producing or selling the product. So you would work for a manufacturer, you might work for a logistics company. Now it's the norm that you'd be working for a subcontractor or in the arrangements that you've got. And the key to doing that was that Thatcher diluted the power of the unions through a continuous series of legislation, which wasn't really rebutted or changed by the Blair government, because he bought into what she was doing largely. There were some minor changes. So what they object to is any resistance to people being made poorer. And the history over that time, under Norman Tebbit was the Minister of Employment, that they had to smash the unions, as they called them. And they've been successful. But what we've managed to do, unions like the RMT and others now that are coming back, is survive that, because people will always want a union. And where we have been able in certain areas to be stronger than others. So in retail, it's highly unusual to have effective trade unionism. In logistics in particular now, with the modern mode of distribution, parcel distribution, which employs thousands and thousands of people, if not millions, it's highly rare to have unions, and people are grossly exploited. So the potted history has been a continual round of unions falling back from maybe 13 million in 81, 82 to 6 or 7 million. And there's some other unions outside the TUC, as it's called, British Medical Association, Royal College of Nurses, and barristers now who are actually thinking about going on strike.
They have done.
The Royal College of Nurses, which has never had a national strike, is going to be balloting soon because of the way that healthcare workers are treated. And I think everybody else will be doing as well, because the strain and the stress in these organisations is too much for people to bear anymore, as well as the pay packet strain as well.
A few people unhappy with your comment about zero-hour contracts, just so that you know, on the grounds that they quite like them. I mean, actually, on some people who were on them. So the idea of making it illegal, it would upset some people who currently like being on them.
Well, you can have flexible working. We have legislation in this country which was brought under Labour for flexible work. So you don't have to have a 0 hours contract to go onto a flexible working basis. And in fact, we should go further with workers' rights if we got a different government to get those kind of arrangements. But what you wouldn't want is if we've got a fallow period in the company where they just reduce their labour costs to zero to protect themselves and give you no protections as a counterparty. All contracts should be balanced. So if the company wants some flexibility and you want some flexibility, it should be an equal or at least a fair deal. So these type of 0 hours contracts should be illegal, in my opinion, because it's just exploitation. That doesn't mean you can't have a flexible contract that's worthy of the name being a contract.
We'll get onto the calls after the 11:15 junction, because there's a couple of other things I want to ask you about. I heard you say words to the effect. Grant Shapps is claiming today that you've had an offer. The deal that is on the table actually means largely no compulsory redundancies at all. If the unions are not prepared to put that deal to their membership, we will never know whether members would accept it. Before you comment on that, I think I heard you say something to the effect that there's not much point to any of this until the new Prime Minister is in place, because the hands of Shapps, even if he wanted to do anything, are essentially tied by this period of limbo that we're in. So shouldn't this round of industrial action have been called off until there is a new Prime Minister, given that you're not really, the people upon whom you're seeking to exercise leverage are all on holiday?
Well, if we left a dispute without any action for two months or longer, all the momentum would go out of that dispute, and we have to show the other side, the people that we're bargaining with or attempting to, that we're serious.
Right.
So today, somewhere in London, there are Treasury and DfT officials negotiating with the representatives of the mayor, the London mayor, about our members' terms and conditions. We're not allowed into that, and crucially, the future of the pension scheme, which is a vital aspect. So they're negotiating it, but we're not. So it's a protest against that we are being excluded from a negotiation that will affect our people. The same thing is happening on the railway as well. Grant Shapps has implemented £4 billion worth of cuts across the railway network, including London Transport. That's an arbitrary decision. He didn't do that with us, and he's then saying this morning that he's going to make us all redundant, issue Section 188 letters. He's forgotten that he said he's not involved continuously for 3 months. But this morning on Sky and the BBC, I believe, he said they'll all be issued with Section 188 letters. They'll all be fired, in effect, or put on notice of dismissal. And the companies have told us they want to give all our members new contracts of employment. So Grant Shapps is this morning saying he's going to fire and rehire selectively our people. He was condemning it 3 months ago or 4 months ago on the P&O debacle, where they sacked all of our people. So I really think he's at the end of his tether, politically and personally, because he's flexing some right-wing muscles so that he gets a place in the new cabinet when we have this vicious turn to the hard right under Truss. and he backed the wrong horse in that race. So he's saying a lot of stuff which I think is chaff to deflect the end of his career as a cabinet minister, which I think is imminent. So I don't know where we're going with him, but we've got to show that we mean business as a negotiating partner.
You see them as being peas in a pod, the treatment of your members by, and you'll have seen that DP World have posted profits of £600 million today, 700 odd of the workforce handed their sandwiches wrapped in a roadmap with no notice whatsoever. That you see that as was that actually a Section 188? That wasn't, was it? That was
they issued it
Section
after.
188.
That was the illegality.
Yes,
that they were guilty
the fact that
of,
they hadn't done it
because they hadn't done it, hadn't notified or consulted us over a 45-day period. So they broke the law. And in fact, Grant Shapps was in Dubai with the royal family who owned DP World several months before, and he never thought to mention to everyone else in the industry that perhaps the Sultan of Dubai was going to make 800 British seafarers redundant illegally shortly after he came back.
And briefly, Mick Lynch, this line, which I've heard a few times now, that you don't put the latest offer to your members, and that is...
Yeah, we do. Well, we do put it to our members. This week on Wednesday, on the eve of the strikes, I did an online meeting with 14,000 RMT striking members. We tell them exactly what's going on. When they were doing the deal on Europe to leave Europe, they didn't come back from every meeting in Brussels and put it to another referendum, which would have been an interesting characteristic. So when you're in a negotiation and somebody says something to you, and it might be, if we do this, if we make this move, will you make a counter move? Which is what happens in negotiation, even when you're buying your house or whatever. You don't go back to all your controlling bodies and put it to a referendum every week. The offer is unacceptable. Everyone in my union knows it's unacceptable. The diet of stuff, the changes they want to put forward are entirely unacceptable. We have a meeting of maintenance reps on Network Rail every Friday. There's one this afternoon, and there's between 300 and 500 elected representatives and activists on that call. They're telling us directly they will not accept this offer. If I put it to a referendum, it'd be a waste of postage stamps. I can tell you that now.
It's 11:17. You mentioned Brexit. A few people were a bit unhappy that the subject didn't come up when you did the full disclosure interview with me. So that must remember to address that issue. And a quick shout, actually, to some of my colleagues on the production side of events for somehow managing to put together an incredibly slick and professional-sounding Mick Lynch jingle, despite the fact that he only agreed to do this phone in about 20 minutes ago. Have you ever had your own jingle before, Mick? Is that?
Not yet. I'll get some more. We've got some T-shirts now. There's some Mick Lynch T-shirts out there.
We'll do you an MPEG or a JPEG or whatever it is. Right, let's hit the phones. Brian is in Milton Keynes. Brian, what would you like to ask the General Secretary of the RMT?
First of all, good morning, Mick. I'm a big fan.
Good.
Mick, do you think a rise in the trade union movement, effective trade union movement, would result in an increase in productivity?
Well, it can do, because a lot of companies are looking for technological and work practice change. And what you need to do with that is do it under an agreement. Somebody told me the other day that Siemens, one of the most successful firms in the world, since 1945, when they restructured the company, have not made a compulsory redundancy in the entire modern history of that firm. And that is a remarkable achievement. Now, the industrial relations setup is different in Germany, but it does prove that if you work through, reskill people, retool a company, which is what we didn't do in the 70s and the 80s, we decided to export all of our manufacturing industry to China and parts of Europe as well, as it happens. And I used to work in engineering, making things for export, and I had to leave that sector because it disappeared. If you do that through union agreement, I think you can make fundamental change, make the economy better, and make people richer as you go, which is what's happened in the German economic miracle. So union participation can be a very positive outcome. And we've done that across the railway, by the way. Rolling stock in Britain has been restructured. In the company I used to work for, and I was leading that, we restructured it, we changed the technology, and we created a highly successable business in Eurostar, which runs trains to Europe. So it can be done.
Did you hear Liz Truss's comments, the leaked recording of her saying that British workers lacked graft or and that historically low productivity was due to a lack of application by the workforce?
Well, I love that. My mother would have said these people have never done a hand's turn of work in their lives. People that have enjoyed going to Eton, Oxford, Harrow. In her case, she's been to Oxford, I believe. And she's from a working class background, I grant that. I think her father was a professor of mathematics or something. These people tend to work in PR, financial consulting, and then they come and run the country. And I admire businessmen and women and entrepreneurs who do start their own business. They put their capital at risk. So there's an argument they should get a better reward. But none of the people in our cabinet have done that. They've never had to go out and restructure a business. They've never had to deal with redundancy, even as business people. They've never had to face people like me in an argument, articulating the case, and they've never had to be made redundant. I've been in work for people that have gone bust, and I've not got my wages for a month in construction. So you do need some experience, and I don't think Sunak, Truss, Johnson, I don't think Cameron and Osborne were the right people to run the country, purely because they've never had that life experience, and they live a gilded existence, and that's a problem for the country, and the problem that the way we run it, and the sort of people that inherit power.
I don't know if you know this. You mentioned T-shirts. The actress Maxine Peake was actually wearing a Mick Lynch T-shirt the other night. So be careful what you wish for.
I do admire Maxine Peake.
Brian, thank you. Colin is in Windsor. Colin, what would you like to ask Mick?
Good morning, James. Good morning, Mick. And Mick Lynch, fantastic work. I've been so impressed with what you've done over the last few months.
Thank you.
My question is, do you believe that British workers' rights will be enhanced or weakened by us leaving the EU?
Well, in terms of the most of the legislation that we've got that is not inherited from the EU, it's mainly the Working Time Directive, which we implemented as a 48-hour week, would you believe? So it's a very diluted version of what come. But it's up to the government at Westminster whether they want to change those laws. All of the laws that we had inside the EU are now written copied straight into British legislation. So if you want to change any of those laws for better or worse, you now have a sovereign right to do that. If you're in the EU, you can't. But if you take the last Corbyn manifesto, which I obviously support, it's likely that manifesto was illegal under the European Union because you cannot go to public ownership of the leading parts of the economy, the railways, energy and the rest of it.
What have they just done in France with EDF?
Well, they've used an emergency power to cap it. The EDF was already...
But within the bounds of EU legislation.
Yeah, they have. But if you they haven't got round to the energy. The fourth railway package that was brought in by the EU means that all railway services have to be subject to privatisation. And they're doing that in France, Germany, and in Spain right now.
So there is more wiggle room than perhaps some of your arguments allowed.
There may be wiggle room, but the French and Germans tend to interpret what they do more liberally than we do.
Yeah, but they're members of the same institution. So the RMT's position is driven, because a lot of people are very interested in this. It's driven by the conviction that you couldn't have a programme of full renationalisation under European Union.
Yeah, and I don't think you can. So certainly the railways could not be taken into public ownership, or they can only be taken temporarily into public ownership under the fourth railway package. And those packages are going to be brought to all public services. And things like the free movement of labour, which many people appreciate, and I'm not against people moving to get a job, but it also means that you have to inherit the terms and conditions that are brought. So you had what was called the Viking Laval case, where Lithuanian workers were posted into Scandinavia and they brought Lithuanian wages, which obviously undermines the local market. So there are problems about the free movement of labour and capital that undermine collective agreements.
And we're not going to get into a half an hour ding-dong about this.
No.
But you're cherry-picking again. I mean, there are plenty of...
everyone does that.
But some people think you're a refreshing change, Mick Lynch. You can't use the everybody does it defence.
No, but
you can't seriously look at what's happened since 2016 and not regret, in part...
I do regret that there is a Conservative government bringing
What were you expecting?
Well, we were asked in principle, weren't we?
Yes.
Do you approve of the European Union and do you want to remain a member of it? My position is the traditional left position, going back to Peter Shaw and Michael Foot.
Lexit.
Lexit, if we want to call it that. If we'd had the European Community, the EEC, I would have voted to stay in the EEC. I don't personally, and many people in my union, don't believe that Europe should be a sovereign country. I don't believe in a European army, which will come.
No, it won't.
I don't believe... Well, let's see. I don't believe...
What's wrong with armies that we're in? There's armies that we're not in that we're supposed to be worried about historically.
Possibly. I don't believe that we should give up much of our fiscal policy to a European state. I was in Ireland at the weekend seeing family, and mortgages are going up in Ireland because of the decisions of the European Central Bank in France.
We've got the highest inflation in the G7.
Yes, we have.
Largely because of Brexit. Even the Wall Street Journal, which leans to the right, says so.
Well, I saw an economist say it's 50% to do with the oil and gas.
All right, and 48% to do with Brexit.
Well, possibly, and that's a consequence. But
would you go back in if they gave us the option?
we can consider having a relationship with Europe on a better basis than we're going to get, certainly. And if it was the EEC, I would certainly support it.
I should go back to Colin because I've got on my hobby horse now. Colin, are you satisfied with that answer?
No, not particularly, because I did hear...
Okay, that's fair enough.
Sorry, Mick.
I accept that. Yeah.
Thanks, Paul. Mick Truss, Liz Truss and Richie Sunak both said they want to scrap every single piece of EU legislation that's on the books. So...
Yeah, but our employment laws don't sit in EU legislation. So the anti-trade union laws
they provide the base, though. And they can go below the base now. You know this.
Anti-union laws are not anything to do with the EU legislation. They come mainly...
He's not talking about the anti-union laws. He's talking about protections that are enshrined in law, which does reflect the EU, but they're promising to rip up everything that was inherited from the EU, which is going to make the situation for British workers immeasurably worse.
So we need to get rid of this government. And get a better government.
You shouldn't have voted to give them the power to do it, man.
Well, no, they would have the power to do it anyway, because the deal that they were... Let's not forget that Cameron was elected on a basis of renegotiating the relationship with Europe. So the only way they wouldn't have had the referendum was to get some of those freedoms anyway, which is what Cameron was elected for.
Maybe. Back to Colin. Sorry, I said I was not going to eat your lunch, and I just did.
Aye, okay. Sorry, Mike. I'm in total disagreement about EU.
Yeah, that's part of democracy.
There's a golden rule in life. Never trust a Tory. And they are going to demolish every workers' right they can possibly think of, and ones that we even haven't.
And you waved it through.
I waved it as passing by, perhaps. We didn't believe in the EU. We never did. Some of us who have socialist leanings, socialist backgrounds. The priority for me is not to undo history, but to get a different government that's going to strengthen employees' rights. And if I look at what's happening in seafaring, we've had British ratings destroyed while we've been in the EU, and there's not one piece of EU legislation that would have brought back British seafarers.
How many French P&O workers were chucked out without notice by P&O?
But they were a few, but they were not under it's not covered by EU legislation. It's covered by the international.
A lot of Irish people telling me their mortgages haven't gone up.
Well, they will be going up because they're going to put the interest rates up.
Take some news and then we'll get back to the phones. I'm glad that we've lanced the Brexit boil. A lot of complaints when you came on full disclosure. Okay. But it's not. Full disclosure is not about that, whereas the radio programme is. So there you go. Horses for courses. And Mick Lynch taking your calls on LBC. Let's get straight back to the switchboard. Hannah is in Yeovil. Hannah, what would you like to ask the General Secretary of the RMT?
Hello, Mick. Thank you so much for taking my call. I wondered, considering the amount of support that the unions give to Labour financially, do you think it is now time for Labour to return the favour, support strikes and call for a general strike?
Well, unions do give support, and I support the idea that we want a Labour government, even though Keir Starmer's wouldn't be my selection. It's better for my people, and I think for all people, that he gets elected. So,
who would be out of the current cabinet?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I'm not a member of the Labour Party, so I don't get a vote anyway.
The RMT is not affiliated either, which a lot of people don't realise.
So we've not been affiliated for 20 years now, I think. So what I think they should do, I don't think.
Dodging the question.
I'm not. Well, I don't. I'll be pegged to pick in a favourite forever, so I'm not going to do that.
Sorry, and I said I wasn't going to interrupt.
Yeah. So what I think he's got to do is recognise that he's got to identify with the problems that people are suffering. There's obviously a cost of living crisis. There's obviously a lot of alienation about the way people feel they're being treated. So the long-term effects of cuts to health and council services, care services, I think people are realising that now. So he's got to find a way to be robust and bold about that and identify with it, even if he can't come up with detailed policies. I don't expect him to come on our picket lines. I've got to be honest with you. But I don't expect him to sack people who want to. There's got to be a bit of freedom for MPs to express themselves. I do think he'd make a better atmosphere for us to get settlements and probably give better funding to public services. But whether he should support a general strike, that would be up to him. I don't think he's going to do that. I don't actually think we're going to get a general strike because only the TUC can do that. And if you know the TUC, they're not that radical. I do think you're going to get a wave of synchronised and coordinated responses to these crises that we've got. And we've seen that today. Unite bus workers are out at the same time as London Underground workers. Now, that's not arranged. It's not, we don't sit down with a whiteboard and say, you do this and we'll do that. But it's not an accident. People recognise that it's more effective and has greater leverage if you do that together. So I think there will be waves of it, and there will be mass protests. There's one in Scotland on September the 7th, and there's going to be another one in London in mid-October. So I think there's going to be a build-up of people as they start to get those bills and these utility energy caps come into play. There will be a tremendous kickback from people who can't afford to pay. And I think the other danger is we're going to have a cliff edge recession, because once working people and even fairly well-to-do people say, well, I've got to stay in, I can't pay these bills, discretionary spending is going to fall through the floor, and a lot of these small businesses are going to be in a lot of trouble in the next period, the next season, through the autumn and winter, I believe.
We're already hearing from businesses going under. Just a fish and chip shop owner in Southend this time last week talking about an increase of a multiple of 6 or 7 on his energy bills. The problem is that this adds to the sense of your industrial action being badly timed. I mean, I know that you're going to talk about the urgency of the situation for your members, but the people whose inconvenience is the currency with which you deal, it is our inconvenience. It is the inconvenience of people who are struggling to pay bills and struggling to get to work. It's let's just say it's unfortunate.
Well, we don't choose time, and we don't choose the period in which the companies come to us and say, we're going to make several thousand of your members. We believe it's probably 5,000 or 6,000 people potentially redundant. Now, we don't choose that. They've come to us and said that. It's also been 3 years, and the anniversaries have gone by since we've had a pay deal in many companies, 2 and 3 years. So those anniversaries have gone by. In the case of Network Rail, we're 8 months behind, plus we're 20 months behind the last time we got a pay rise. And it's worse in the train operators. So that's not our choice. And yeah, it's never convenient for anyone to have a national rail strike. I get that. But if we weren't doing this, James, and any caller, I think there would be no resistance to what's going on in this country at all. And people, if you're fed up with being poor and fed up with being made poorer, some organisations and some part of our civic community, which the trade unions are part of, democratic institutions, has got to respond to this. And I can't see anyone else. Certainly the media aren't putting up a resistance. The commentators are largely in step with Liz Truss and all the rest of it. And all they're interested in is cutting taxes. I've not met one working person that says, what I need now is a tax cut. Because they've got elderly parents or kids that need hospital services. They want their schools properly funded. Schools are falling apart in this country. Nobody's saying to me,
literally in the case of roofs.
Exactly. Nobody's saying to me, let's have a tax cut, because what tax cuts means is service cuts. So I think, to go back to the origins of the question, Starmer's got a dilemma. I hope he succeeds. I hope he can express his values that show that he's in sympathy and empathy with what people are going through, and then can show that if you got a Labour government, it would be a different, more compassionate world that we're going into, rather than this fairly cynical model where it's every person for themselves, and the situation where people find that even paying their taxes to run our services is something that is abhorrent to them. I can't believe we've gone into that type of world. I don't think Starmer's like that. I think he is probably a compassionate guy, but he's got to show some...
You met him?
I've met him once on the P&O dispute. He was very good, I've got to say, because he wanted to help on that dispute. He got his front benchers right into it. He got his staff into it. And they were really effective in the Commons. But it's an 80-seat majority. So it's like an elected, you call it elected dictatorship, but the Tories do whatever they want because there's nothing that the opposition can do apart from moral pleading, effectively, and some parliamentary manoeuvres, which are delaying tactics, that can stop them. So we haven't got a balanced ticket in Parliament. And there's no opposition inside the Tory party. The idea of a paternalist liberal Tory is completely out of fashion. And you've seen this debate within the Tory party, which is solely focused on harsh measures, anti-immigration, condemning people, making enemies of working people and trade unions, and cutting taxes. I don't think that's where the British public want to be right now.
But it's probably where the Conservative Party membership
exactly
wants to be,
and we don't even know how many of them there are. They won't tell us. If I did a ballot on this basis, I would be injuncted. I have to tell every employer how many of my members work for their company, what locations they actually work in, and what grade, i.e. job title, they have. And I have to declare that publicly. If I get it wrong, I could be sequestrated. They're going to elect our Prime Minister. They've recast the ballot because they said it was insecure, and they didn't know who was receiving papers. They don't have a proper membership system. And these people are going to decide the Prime Minister of this country. And we're called militant union barons. And an unknown cast of people, self-selecting, are going to elect the Prime Minister on the most right-wing platform we've had in modern times. It's an absolute affront to our democracy that we're called barons and they're Democrats.
So, I mean, the system of voting under which the next Prime Minister is to be elected would be, if it was deployed by a trade union seeking a mandate for industrial action, you'd be in court.
I'd be in court, and the law she wants to bring in could sue my union £1 million a day. If I get those ballots wrong, and there's a whole series of checklists which she's going to make harder, that I'd be sued and could be put in prison personally, and the union fined, probably the latter. Some people might want to see me in prison. But they've got an election system that none of us know anything about. We don't even know who's in membership, what their credentials are. I have to prove these people are members of my union. And if somebody complains that they didn't get a ballot paper because of the post or whatever, they can challenge me in court. We've got no idea what the electorate is and how it will be conducted. It's an absolute affront.
That's a point worth reiterating. The simple system of balloting for the next Prime Minister is what you need to do to take industrial action is considerably more difficult, more transparent and more regulated than what the Conservative membership needs to do to pick a Prime Minister. 11:42 is the time. Thank you, Hannah. James is in Bedford. James, what would you like to ask?
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask, thank you for taking my call. Does Mick give any credence to the whole idea that increasing people's wages on such a large scale would increase inflation or affect inflation in a negative way?
Well, I don't, particularly during this period. I mean, if wages were running ahead of prices, then clearly you would get inflation. There'd be more money in the economy than was needed, in effect, and productivity would not be paying for it. What we've seen since Cameron and Osborne were elected is millions of people in this country, tens of millions probably, have not had pay rises that are anywhere near the rising cost of living. And for working people, let's say people under 35 grand a year, the amount of money you're spending on basics, the utilities, your everyday bills, your clothing, food and whatever, is much greater than it is for people on the higher wages. So working class inflation is actually higher than the statistics because that measures prices across the spectrum. So wages have actually been suppressed all through that period in the private sector and the public sector. So you'd argue that productivity has actually gone up because the amount of people are being paid less for the output they're creating. So prices are outstripping wages all over the British economy. So it cannot be the case that low-paid people on moderate wages, £25,000, £30,000, and the low-paid are responsible for price hikes. That is just not happening. You'll find a whole clutch of economists that will tell you that's true. What is going up is record dividends and record profits. In the first quarter of this year, profits on the stock market were 39 billion. BP alone, I think, in the first quarter made something like double-figure billions. I can't remember. It was 8, 9, 10 billion. That's not per year. That's per quarter. Wholesale gas and energy prices are uncapped. Even though 50% of our carbon energy comes from our own resources in the North Sea, produced by companies that used to be in the public sector, that we used to own, that are exporting profits right now to tax havens. And the same thing is happening on the railway, by the way. So it cannot be that moderately paid people are causing inflation, but they are expected to pay the price of inflation through capped wages or no wages or loss of jobs.
Yeah, thank you, James. I'll just read you a quick one via text, Mick, from Mark. Could you please ask Mick Lynch whether the RMT could accept the deal on the table for the highest paid railway workers, i.e. the train drivers, while continuing to negotiate a better package for the lower paid workers, raising their worth? This would close the pay gap between high and low wage workers, put an end there's a typo there, put an end to something, because train drivers are paid well enough already.
Yeah, I mean, our policy is exactly that. We have a policy in the RMT, which is in all of our pay claims to every company, that there should be extra consideration and extra increases for those below. Typically what we've done, let's say you get a 5% pay rise, if only, the effect of the pay rise would be at least X amount of money for the low paid. And you usually say those under 25,000 will therefore receive a bit more, and the higher paid up the scales will get the standard flat rate. Train drivers and other grades outside Network Rail have not received any pay offer whatsoever from these companies. They've only been told that they would get the public sector pay cap, which was 2% for a salary increase and 1% if you accept all of the productivity measures. Now, that was issued at the end of last year to all public sector departments. So we've not had an offer from any of the employers, so we can't accept anything. They run around in the studios, Grant Shapps. I don't think he actually understands the difference between Network Rail and the train operators, even though he's responsible, saying we should have accepted it. If we had accepted that deal, it would only be 50% of the people in the dispute. That deal's not acceptable at all. But we will be looking, if it's a comfort, for a deal that gives priority to lower paid people. And that will mean that higher paid people will get slightly less.
It's 11:46. Mick Lynch with me until 12. If you want to put a question to him, 0345 60 60 973 is the number you need. A lot of text coming in, a lot of people wanting to litigate our Brexit conversation. I think we could do that, but we could sell tickets for that one if you fancy it.
Possibly, yeah.
This is where I have problems with Mick Lynch on the EU stuff. I admire him immensely on union leadership, but that's it. Ireland's GDP per capita is now over double what ours is. It's higher than Norway and Switzerland. I know where I'd rather be living. And does he now see the left support for Brexit as strategically naive, especially when you see the recent nationalisation of EDF in France and the hijacking of UK policy by hard-right free market fundamentalists? I would remind you, much as I would like to dig into the weeds on that one, that there is actually industrial action. We're in the middle of a 3-day period of industrial action, featuring in large part Mick Lynch and his membership, which is why we will be focusing a little more on that than events not directly linked. Let's get straight back to the phones. Arnu is in Lewisham. Arnu, what would you like to ask?
Hi, Mick. I'd like to say I'm also a big fan.
I just want to say we've got 10 minutes left. If you hate him, you're allowed to ring in as well. All right, 0345 60 60 973. I mean that most sincerely. Carry on.
I'll speed it up. So Mick, I'm a doctor. I'm a consultant. I work in the NHS. And at the moment, amongst the medical profession, there's talk of industrial action, mainly amongst junior doctors, but also to a certain extent consultants, because we've taken a real terms pay cut over the years of about 30%. Certainly the junior doctors have. But I think what's happened, I think the British Medical Association, the BMA, I think we've only had taken industrial action once, maybe in the last 40 years. Doctors tend to be quite a conservative bunch. I don't mean politically necessarily, but in terms of industrial action. And I think there is that kind of inherent fear about what the public are going to think, because we're supposed to be these, selfless, altruistic doctors who, would gladly work for free, etc. But actually, we're just like everyone else. We're members of the workforce. We have mortgages to pay and families to pay for, and so on. So my question was, what would be your kind of advice about how the BMA could kind of play it tactically?
Well, I certainly think you need a mandate. So having an industrial action ballot and the willingness to take that action, and I know the difficulties of nurses and doctors and other clinicians having to do that, and it's a conscience thing as well as a practical thing. I think you need the mandate, and the Royal College of Nurses are looking that way as well, which will be a massive change in attitude. And then we've got to think about the public, the other trade unions, about how we can support that. So interestingly enough, a lot of us trade union leaders and activists are thinking about, there's industrial action, there's one strand of activity, then collective and community action can be another strand of activity. So there can be break time walkouts, there can be mass assemblies, there can be demos, there can be refusals by the public to do certain things. So we're looking at this concept of collective action coming alongside. But I think the BMA has got to find its, I was going to use a crass word, but it's got to find its strength to say, look, we are prepared to take industrial action. We never want to do that, but we need the mandate in our back pocket at the negotiating table. And I do remember the junior doctors' action from a few years ago, and I remember how ruthless Jeremy Hunt was in dealing with it, even though you'd won the moral high ground. So we've got to look at that so that the whole community supports all of NHS workers. And I'm sure a lot of NHS workers are sick of, the archetypal nurse as an angel. My wife, who's been a nurse for 39 years in the NHS, would jump up the wall and jump on anyone who called her an angel. She says, I want to be respected as a professional, as a committed worker. I want to be paid properly, and I want you to take some of the stress, which I know is the bugbear of every single NHS worker. The stress you're all under is up there as well, but you've got to get paid properly in order to look after yourself. So collective action as well as industrial action is the next step. And I think many people would support that. But you've got to show yourselves that you've got the steel to take it on as well, so that we can come in behind.
So when you say the TUC lacks the stomach for a general strike, you seem to be leaning towards the idea that there might be a sort of de facto general strike, even if it's not called officially.
I think we've got to broaden it. So the idea that we all just go on strike for a week or so and that resolves it, it may not be what happens. The TUC has got to widen it, because the BMA is a non-TUC union.
Yeah.
The Royal College of Nursing is a non-TUC union, traditionally. We've got to broaden it anyway, but we've got to broaden what the activity is. If there are people in care homes, NHS clinics, NHS hospitals doing vital surgery and all the rest of it, and vital care, we can't expect them to walk out for 3 weeks and the rest of us watch. We've got to broaden it so we're supporting them in a wave of campaigning, and we've got to figure out what that means. But if it means bringing the utility companies to task, the water boards and all the rest of it, about how we teach them that they need to come to the table, and that
you mean imagination? You're talking about imagination.
Yes,
a bit more imagination.
We need all sorts of communities coming into it. We need all sorts of campaigns, whether it's your local library, your local care home, shutting your hospital, all the rest of it. We need those campaigns coming together under one umbrella.
It's 11:55. Thank you, Anu. Quite a lot of questions coming in via text. I think I know the answer to this one, but for the benefit of people who don't, because this is repeatedly being asked, why don't you carry on working but stop taking the fares like they've done in other countries?
We would love to. So they've done it in Australia and Japan.
Right, yes.
That is illegal under the anti-trade union laws in this country. That would be illegal industrial action, and it would be illegal for the passenger under the railway bylaws to travel without a ticket or an authority to travel. So you could still be fined. You would be breaching the contract that you have when you buy a ticket. A ticket is a contract with the railway. And it would be illegal for us to stand by and operate those trains and not collect the revenue.
So literally breaking the law.
Yeah, breaking the anti-trade union laws.
Because a lot of people...
We've had high-level legal advice on that, and we can't do it. We'd love to do that.
Andy's in Chipping Campden. Andy, what would you like to ask?
Hi, James. Hi, Mick. Excuse me. I'd love to know, bearing in mind that all the RMT money comes from their members' contributions, if the government continued to ignore the RMT and the unions and decided to abolish many of the trade union laws, how far would you go in challenging the courts? How long would you be prepared to go and using members' money for that? Because I dare say the government would try to bankrupt you at one point.
Yeah, we do challenge the laws, and we've been successful in refining the interpretation of the laws we've got, and have got over many of the hurdles. That's why we can carry out the actions that we do, and have carried that might. We will challenge the laws where we can, but the law's not written. So it's, I'd love to say that we're going to defeat this in the courts. When you go to court, though, the judge is going to come from a background, I'm afraid, in this country that's similar to the people who are making the laws. And I've never been into a court, and my predecessors, Bob Crow and Mick
Hang on a minute. What do you mean by that? Because the judges are coming in for as much of a kicking from this government as the union barons are.
The tactic is injunction, James.
Right,
they take injunctions.
So that's a personal
where you
judgment.
don't get the full case. So it's a temporary injunction. We sought to get the P&O stuff overturned in an injunction. They said to us, it's probably cost you £1 million to take the case. Even if you're successful with an injunction, if you don't win the full case, which will take up to a year to hear, you will be liable as a trade union for all of P&O's losses during that period, which could have been £20 million a week. We can't do that. The law's stacked against us. And the judges very rarely find in favour of the trade unions. It's in 10% of cases, I would imagine. But we will challenge it if we can, but we'll need the other unions as well.
Again, there's a lot. We keep coming back to this notion of cooperation, don't we?
We need cooperation across trade unions, but the trade unions have got to get out of their normal mindset and get out into the communities and almost mentor and teach people about campaigning. Back in the day, in the 70s, there would have been a whole network of residents association, renters, and housing is a massive thing as well. We need to organise the renters, the younger people and others that are living in precarious housing, paying extortionate rents, which is another factor of alienation in this society. We need to get those people involved in campaigning and trade union type campaigning, informing bodies of organised people together.
We're nearly out of time. What happens? What do RMT members who are on strike get paid on strike days?
They don't get paid anything. They lose their wages. We make collections and we put together some financial support, but that's on a handout basis. It's not a fixed number. Where people have got hardship, they can go to their branch and say, can you help me out with this gas bill or whatever. We don't have any fixed payments for anybody, and we have to fund that ourselves from our own resources.
I've got Jeremy here wants to know how long he's going to have to go without pay. He's already at his wit's end.
Well, the majority of our members are dug in. If Jeremy needs to go to his branch, we've put aside a considerable set of money to help people that have got need financial assistance. So if he goes to his local branch, there is assistance available to him, and we've already sent that out and circulated it to all of the branches in the country. Finally,
Mick Lynch, you can clear something up for us. The Secretary of State for Transport, Grant Shapps, was on BBC Breakfast this morning. That's the closest you ever get to him, isn't it?
Yeah, over my breakfast.
You and me both. But anyway, here's what he had to say.
You incorrectly told your viewers there's only one train running from Manchester to London. I think that's not the case, even under the reduced timetable. It's 4 trains an hour.
A direct train?
Direct trains, yeah.
There's only 1 an hour at the moment.
Well, all I can tell you is there are still trains running down the West Coast main line. The strikes do not enhance the situation. And
well, let's not get. But I mean, I think we're getting bogged down in a detail here.
Won't be trains running.
We're getting bogged down in a detail here, but I think it matters actually. There is only 1 direct train an hour between London and Manchester at the moment.
Well, when you're saying direct, are you saying trains that don't stop at any other? When you say direct, are you saying trains that stop at no other stations? Because most trains stop at Milton Keynes along the way, for example.
Well, they've always done that.
I'm not quite clear on your definition.
They've always done that. There's never been a train that's gone directly from London Euston to
so
Manchester
it's not the case
Piccadilly.
that,
That's never been the case.
Strike days, which I think is where you may be getting confused here, that's not the case. There has recently been an issue where ASLEF called for action short of a strike, and 3 days later there was a 90% reduction in train drivers available to drive that route. Clearly coordinated unofficial action by ASLEF, meaning that there aren't trains available. Under that reduced timetable, it went down to 4 trains an hour.
Who's right?
He's completely wrong. In fact, there's never been a timetable with 4 trains an hour between London and Manchester. It's a 20-minute service, so there's 3 trains an hour.
And today?
And today there's 1 train per hour. There's 1 train to Liverpool, 1 train to Manchester, and 1 train to Glasgow, 1 train to Birmingham. There's only 4 trains in total because he's totally destroyed the industry. 8 weeks ago, he told us there'd be no overtime. Drivers have stopped working overtime because they don't want to work it because they're so fed up, and he can't run the railway. At the same time, he wants to make maybe 5,000 or 6,000 people redundant in an industry that's running on overtime. He's also said this morning that he wants to issue Section 188 notices, which he doesn't have the power to do because he's not the employer. So he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's lost the plot about an industry that he's meant to be in charge of. So he needs to get his act together and allow us in the industry who do know how it works to get on with resolving these problems. But he's stopping that, and I mean that. It's not just hype. He is the block to this dispute being resolved.
Mick Lynch, General Secretary of the RMT, many thanks indeed.
Will you be a lousy scab or will you be a man?
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Don't scab for the bosses, don't listen to their lies. Us poor folks haven't got a chance unless we organize.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on?